voice-sound.com, theproaudiofiles.com, I'm going to be doing a review of the JZ Black Hole microphone. So before I start getting into any of the specifics, I want to play something that I recorded with the JZ microphone, explain the setup, and then explain what I'm listening to when I assess a microphone.
While you a fugitive, you running, always got a new escape for something, it'll catch up to you one day. It'll catch up to you one day. While you a fugitive, you running, always got a new escape for something, it'll catch up to you one day.
Okay, cool. So the way this is set up is we're in an ISO room, and we've got the JZ microphone set to cardioid pickup, and then we're going into a BAE 1073, with the BAE set only a couple of clicks over, I think about 30 dB of gain, only because the BAE, as soon as you start putting more than 30 dB of gain in there, it starts to saturate and impart its own tone for better or for worse, and I wanted to get a pretty neutral capture of this mic. So, okay. Now, what do I listen for when I'm assessing a microphone? I don't really listen for good or bad. I think that that's not really helpful. Every microphone can have its purpose and place, so it's better to start putting characteristics onto a microphone. The first is going to be the EQ curve. The EQ curve is going to be how it represents the broad range of frequencies from the lowest lows to the highest highs. The second one is going to be the transient response, how the microphone is reacting to fast attack sounds. And the third is going to be the overall saturation or coloration of the microphone, how it harmonically seems to affect the sound that's coming in, whatever it may be. So I'm going to play that again, and I'm going to start with what I think is one of the most interesting and most pronounced features of the JZ microphone, the saturation curve.
While you a fugitive, you running, always got a new escape for something, it'll catch up to you one day. It'll catch up to you one day.
So, to my ear, there is very, very little component saturation at all. It's actually an extremely transparent microphone, which is great, because when you want to represent the source as the source itself, you really want a microphone that has very low harmonic distortion. And if you want to hear context for the opposite of that, something with very high harmonic distortion, well, listen to the sound of my voice as I'm speaking into the laptop receiver. There's very clearly some high harmonic distortion in there, so polar opposite ends of the spectrum. Now, saturation can be a good thing. Sometimes we want something to have sort of a more retro vibe, or we need something that's going to roll off a bit of top end, or provide some harmonics or some density that isn't necessarily there to begin with, and that's where certain microphones like the vintage Neumanns or generally older microphones start to sound really good to us because there is a lot of component saturation in them. Okay, so now let's talk about the EQ curve.
While you a fugitive, you running, always got a new escape for something, it'll catch up to you one day.
This is pretty darn flat. Now, it might sound a little bit on the bright side if you're not used to hearing things that are set neutral, but you have to keep in mind that a lot of the times when we're hearing microphones, many microphones will start to roll off frequencies starting at around 10K. Here, the JZ microphone is not rolling off any frequencies until about 16K. It's staying pretty flat above there, and so that becomes perceived as bright. A lot of the times when we're adding air, especially to a vocal, we're actually restoring top end that's being lost. So we're balancing the top end more than hyping it up. Here we're hearing something that actually has a very crisp, clean, clear top end, and so it could be perceived as bright. I don't necessarily perceive it as bright. I perceive it as flat. And I think that's pretty cool. In fact, actually, I would say it's very accurate and flat across the whole frequency spectrum with maybe a little bit of pinch in the upper mids. There's just a little bit of added, something around 4K that gives it a little bit of extra brightness. But I mean, I would say it's pretty flat throughout. So if I'm doing anything that's going to require a really present vocal, or just really present sources in general, stuff like reggaeton or pop, then I think that we're really looking at a very, very useful microphone. Now, obviously, we don't always want completely neutral. Sometimes we want a microphone that is going to add a little bit of love in a certain frequency range. Like, if we're recording a kick drum, we want a microphone that is going to probably roll off a little top, because we don't need that. We don't necessarily need cymbal bleed coming in, and, adds a good amount of healthy sub. So we're looking at microphones like D112s as an extreme example, because that is going to help a kick drum along. But for a vocal, we usually want something that's going to sound as accurate to the vocalist as possible, with some exception. Okay, now let's listen to the transient response.
While you a fugitive, you running, always got a new escape for something it'll catch up to you one day. It'll catch up to you one day.
So on all the k and t type of noises, those are transient sounds in a vocal, and they are very, very well represented here. Now, that does not necessarily mean it's a good thing. For vocals, I do like really good transient representation. However, for something like a front of kit capture, this could overload very easily. If we want an acoustic guitar and say the acoustic guitar player is maybe not rhythmically great, or their guitar is particularly bright or stringy, then we might get sort of an annoying sound because those transients could really get in the way of other things in the mix. But if we have somebody who's, let's say we're playing upright bass, or we're doing overheads a little bit further from the kit, or maybe our acoustic guitar player is like really rhythmically popping and has a great string sound, then we're going to want really detailed transient representation, and this microphone is going to be a great choice for those purposes. So okay, now let's hear it in the context of a record. So this is flat, no effects, there's no compression or EQ on the way in, just the microphone and the preamp. And this is what it sounds like without any treatment, doctoring, or anything, not even auto-tune.
While you a fugitive, you running, always got a new escape for something it'll catch up to you one day. It'll catch up to you one day. While you a fugitive, you running, always got a new escape for something it'll catch up to you one day. It'll catch up to you one day. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to start adding some effects, and I'm going to explain what they're doing and why I'm choosing to use them. Most of them are based on context. The only thing that I felt like the vocal really needed for like just general mix purposes was some compression, because there's some louder passages and some shorter passages within the vocal comp. But we're also going to do a little bit of delay and reverb and some auto-tune. And let's just do the delay, reverb, and auto-tune and see how that sounds.
While you a fugitive, running, always got a new escape for something it'll catch up to you one day. It'll catch up to you one day. While you a fugitive, running, always got a new escape for something it'll catch up to you one day.
I mean, to be honest, I could probably get away with slapping on like a little bit of compression, or even just doing some manual vocal rides, like really going in there and messing around with the clip gain, and I could have something that's totally usable. There is a little bit of like room tone that kind of needs to be taken out, like one little notch here at 700 hertz, which will help it along.
While you a fugitive, running, always got a new escape for something it'll catch up to you one day. It'll catch up to you one day.
I mean, to me, sonically speaking, that is excellent. And anything else that I'm doing from there is just going to be aesthetic or creative choices, not anything that's meant to fix anything. Now, based on the sound of the record, there's this sort of like dark, kind of like, maybe like sort of Post Malone-ish, almost a sad quality to the record, and so I kind of want to match the bit of saturation that's going on, do something that stylizes the vocal a little bit more. So I'm going to do some compression and some EQ and saturation as well, but you'll notice that it's not going to massively change the vocal sound.
While you a fugitive, running, always got a new escape for something it'll catch up to you one day. It'll catch up to you one day. While you a fugitive, running, always got a new escape for something it'll catch up to you one day. It'll catch up to you one day. Yeah.
Okay, so big conclusion here. The JZ Black Hole microphone, I would describe it as a very open sounding microphone, a very neutral and well balanced sounding microphone with a really, really smooth sound that captures the top end very naturally and in an extended way. I would use it on pretty much any source that I felt would work just in its own tone. So anything that sounds great right off to begin with and I don't want to mess with, Jay-Z microphone is going to be fantastic. I would pretty much happily put it on any vocalist except for perhaps some vocalists who need a little bit of extra love in the bottom end, maybe something that rolls off a little bit of top. So if I was recording like an Ariana Grande type vocal where it's already naturally very bright, I might reach for something that's more like a U47, where it's gonna shave off a little top, give a little bit of love to the lower mid range, and help create something that's a little bit fuller sounding. But for anything that's already well balanced in tone, then the Jay-Z microphone I think would be a better choice. And I think that as far as bang for your buck goes, this one's going to be really tough to beat. It's a really pretty darn good microphone that vastly outperforms its price point. So I definitely am happy to have it, and I'll be traveling around with mine, recording Elijah and Akon and all those folks with it. Alright guys, till next time.